Okay, very good. All right. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much for joining us today. To our distinguished guests that are joining us virtually, to our panelists. Thank you so much for being a part of this very important conversation. I'd like to welcome you to Hack for Inclusion's Unlocking Human Capital panel entitled Bridging Equity Gaps. My name is Michellana Jester. I'm a lecturer at MIT Sloan in the Global Economics and Management group, and I have the distinct pleasure of moderating today's panel with these incredible guests entitled Bridging Equity Gaps. So let me just very briefly let you know who's joining us today. We have Elena Mendez-Escobar, Executive Director of Strategy and the Health Equity Accelerator at Boston Medical Center. And I will add, just very excited, Elena, her work as an MBA student years ago is the early foundation for this hackathon. So we are so proud to be able to build on the great work that she launched. So thank you so much, Elena. And we also have Caprice Jones, who is the founder and executive director of the Fountain of Youth program based out of Iowa. And he and his team are laying the foundations for changing mindsets that contribute to generational poverty. We also have Martin Nisser, a PhD student, MIT PhD student in electrical engineering and computer science, and Marisa Gaetz, an MIT mathematics PhD student. And they are the co-founders of Brave Behind Bars, a pandemic-born introductory computer science and career readiness program for incarcerated women. And that's based out of the Educational Justice Institute at MIT. So I hope that you've had the opportunity to read our panelists' remarkable backgrounds on the hackathon website and just, take in their incredible journey, what motivates them, and what, has inspired them to do the work that they do. And while we could certainly speak at length to any one of them, that would take up more than the, hour that we have. What I'm going to ask them to do is we'll start off by asking them to essentially introduce themselves by sharing a story that gives some insights as to them, the work that they do, the communities that they serve. And then I'll have about 15 minutes of additional questions that are around inclusive work and how we can better support marginalized communities, populations, as we think about the future of work. And then I'll look to hold about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A, so looking for your questions. And then we'll close with the panelists sharing their final reflections and thoughts on this discussion. And so I want to encourage you to use the chat to share your questions, your reflections and comments. And we'll look to bring those in as we can, as we're kind of moving through this conversation. But I'm going to kick it off with asking Elena if she wouldn't mind, starting us off and sharing her story and the work that she does. So Elena.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. It's really, really exciting to be here after so many years and seeing the mission of Hack for Inclusion continue. I have always been moved in my career for addressing things that are unjust. I think that is the spirit of this hackathon, and the work that I did at McKinsey over 10 years working in Medicaid, which is the public health insurance here in the United States. But now I work in an organization that is fighting to get to health equity, because in America and in many other countries, despite the work that many have done for many years, when you look at health outcomes, there are huge differences on life expectancy and life quality for Black people, for Hispanic peoples, for many groups of people who are not white compared to white neighbors. And we can't stand to that reality anymore. So our organization, we named it the Health Equity Accelerator because we really want to move faster to close those gaps. And one of the big lessons over the last 2 years working on this is how deeply, deeply connected health equity is with the human capital piece of it. And that's primarily because what drives these differences in health outcomes, part of it is related to poverty and decades of barriers to economic mobility for some groups. But even when you control for that, you still see a lot of differences of Black people, Hispanic people having much worse outcomes, even when they have the same socioeconomic level. And it all comes down to trust and agency. We tend to think of healthcare as something that is very clear. Decisions are very clear. Just go to the doctor, they'll tell you what to do. But oftentimes it is not clean. It is not black and white. There is a big gray area of decision making. And what we're seeing is that those decisions are taking a lot longer for these minoritized groups. And when these decisions take longer, they come with more complications, which can result in early death or a lower quality of life. Examples are when you start developing diabetes, when do you start taking insulin? It's not clear. There is a lot of conversation. So the power of all of our employees is in building or destroying that relationship of trust with our patients. So that is why I think it's so important that we have this discussion. In our case is healthcare. I think for many other companies is connecting with their customers as well.
Great, thank you so much. Caprice, can we ask you to jump in and talk about Fountain of Youth? And you're on mute.
My name is Caprice Jones. I live in Dubuque, Iowa. I'm originally from Chicago, the South Side and the West Side. I was born into generational poverty, and I spent many years trying to understand my purpose in this world. And so in 2010, while incarcerated, after doing 12 years, I was on my way back to prison for 3 more years. And I was challenged within the core of my being to not settle for that, to not settling for less for my life, because I was always told that I had so much potential. And that led me to start working on change and then walking in change. And I walked right out of there a changed person with my thinking and my behavior and my ways and doings. And until I moved to Dubuque, Iowa in 2016, me and my wife, we had children, and I had a vision one morning that said nonprofit organizations are very vital in this hour in history, but they must begin to pour into each other. That particular thought process that came to my mind, it was so overwhelming that when I went to work that morning, I shared it with, at the time, one of my beginning board members. He was the pastor where I was working at, and he told me I should pursue it. I've not looked back since. Since then, we've become a catalyst within this community for individuals that has been marginalized, that has been underserved and underrepresented. And it's not just one color. It's all different ethnicities and all different walks of life. There's individuals that come through my program that has lived middle class, but yet they feel poor inside. And so what we do is we inspire, motivate, and encourage individuals to seek the better them and challenge themselves by creating healthy habits. So what we do is we take what's considered a negative and turn it into a positive. It's kind of like the polar opposites of life. And what happens is we also brace ourselves to face those primal fears that every human being possessed from the time they was born. But most humans don't even know none of those things. So what we do is educate them. Our mission is to change the mindsets that contribute to generational poverty. And we emphasize the S based off of not just individuals that's grown up in generational poverty, needs to be educated on how to stop the cycle, but also individuals that never grew up in generational poverty to know how to build those relationships so that we all can identify with what common unity means, community.
Thank you so much. I love that visual, working on change by walking in change, challenging all of us to take up our respective roles in this important work. Thank you for that. Marisa, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Martin representing Brave Behind Bars, which is an introductory web design and career readiness program for incarcerated people. This program is taught both online and in person with lots of help from MIT student teaching assistants. And our curriculum covers HTML, CSS, and the basics of JavaScript. This past summer in 2021, we ran a pilot of our program, which brought together around 30 women from 4 correctional facilities across New England. And these students all came together in the same class remotely. And together, these students developed skills in digital literacy and web design and career readiness. And they built websites to help address some of society's most pressing issues. For example, in this pilot cohort, some of our students built websites that put together resources for women experiencing domestic violence, addiction, and incarceration. And others built websites for personal businesses that they hope to lead post-release. We find that educational opportunities like these not only improve lives by improving career readiness and establishing employable skills, but also by changing how students view themselves. So for example, at the conclusion of our course, many students shared with us their thoughts about the program. And many of them thought initially that coding was total gibberish and nonsense that they would never be able to understand. But by the end of the course, they had confidence not only in their coding abilities, but also a renewed confidence in their own abilities to overcome challenges and to learn complex skills that they didn't initially think were possible.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's, from your respective organizations, you are touching on, this challenge, in terms of bridging this equity gap, thinking about these, what tend to be marginalized communities. And so, I'd love to just kind of jump in and getting your thoughts, reflections, as we think about bridging equity gaps, thinking about the future of work, really. Actually, I read this morning that the U.S. added 431,000 jobs in March, lower than expected, but this is the 11th consecutive month that we've had gains, and this is in the U.S. Of over 400,000 jobs. And when we think about, currently labor statistics suggest that there's about 1.3 million openings. So there are lots of jobs out there, but we know that for some of our marginalized communities members, that there are barriers, social stigma, access to internet, and all of you, healthcare access. So all of you are touching on this challenge in some, in your own unique way, and in many ways looking to stabilize and offer supports for these communities. So if you were to think about, again, a future of work, the barriers, the opportunities for stable and sustainable employment. What are your thoughts? What are we seeing? What are we not seeing in terms of the opportunities, barriers, in your respective or with the respective communities that you're working with? And Martin, I'll ask you to jump in and start us off.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that's a great point. So to this point on barriers, so I mean, the statistics on recidivism speak very clearly to this. So recidivism is the degree to which formerly incarcerated people return to prison. And so to give some examples, within about 3 years, around 40% of released people are back in prison. Within 6 years, about 60%. Within 9 years, about over 80% are back in the facility. But then numerous studies from groups like the RAND Corporation and others have shown that educational programming in prisons can reduce recidivism rates by up to 43%. I think there was a recent study by I think the Brookings Institution that showed that it was even higher than that. But historically, women haven't always profited from some of these advantages. So women's facilities are far smaller with far fewer students than some of the men's facilities. And so these have been traditionally underserved since universities haven't been able to send professors to teach classes to just one or two people in person. But so COVID, when it happened, it opened up a few opportunities here, since a lot of facilities were forced online, but they weren't able to deliver in-person programming anymore. And so what we did in our course was we recruited women from several facilities over and have them zoom into a single lesson. We were able to teach or just allow teaching to happen across several facilities concurrently, no matter how few students were in each actual place. I think another issue is just the fact that the priority in a facility is security. It's not education, and so security is of course important, but it's also a strategy that necessarily optimizes for the short term rather than the long term, since ensuring security often comes at the direct cost of things like educational programming. And so, the way that happens is that, for example, that security means, confining a student to a cell for a given amount of time, or, revoking internet access that they need to zoom into a class. And an issue that dovetails with this is that facilities have just always struggled with funding. And so in our particular case, one challenge we've had to work with in the Brave Behind Bars program is trying to find a way to work with facilities to procure the hardware infrastructure required for our course. So like laptops and hotspots. And technology requirements today are changing just so much more rapidly today than they were just 20 years ago. So this is an issue that I think is just going to get worse. It's become more and more pronounced as time goes on. And then maybe the last point I can make is that so out of the facilities themselves, two major issues that stand in the way of formerly incarcerated people succeeding post-release is social stigma, which you alluded to already, and also these check-the-box policies on the other. So these are laws that remain in a number of states that require formerly incarcerated people to identify themselves as such when they're applying for a new job. And so, I think these issues are slowly improving. We're starting to see improvements in the public sphere. But one benefit of teaching skills like web programming, which we're trying to do in our course, is that we found that students are they can and they're very excited about using these skills to work on their own businesses and their own ideas. So they kind of divorce themselves from the public sentiment of the time or the public policy at the time. And one other thing we've done is also to provide college credit for the program to let students pipeline directly into an actual degree once they get out.
Thank you. I want to just pull on a point that you raised, and maybe Elena, you can continue this thought. As we're thinking about opportunities, barriers, and opportunities for sustainable employment. One of the things that Martin raised was that we optimize for short term, not long term, and that we target we don't necessarily target our funding leading to long-term change. Like we're thinking in very short term. And I would imagine that, in healthcare, that we're probably, doing the same kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit about, what you see as opportunities and barriers, and how this short-term thinking is really proving to be, a barrier, I think, for all of us.
Thank you for pointing that out, because I do think that is at the core of a lot of issues in the workforce, and not just in healthcare, but in healthcare, the example that is talked about more often is how social determinants of health really impact our health more than healthcare interventions. So where we live, how much money we make, whether we're able to exercise or have access to healthy food, all of those things. However, whenever I'm in conversations about the business case for those interventions in housing, in physical activity infrastructure, the benefits in health outcomes are things that you'll see in 20 years. It's not that if you start going to the gym tomorrow, you're going to avoid having a heart attack next week. You're going to avoid a heart attack in 10 years, in 20 years. And that makes it very difficult to fund those infrastructures. So that's definitely something that we see a lot in healthcare. And when it comes to our employees, and I think this is universal, I think we need to be a lot more flexible in what we value in our employees and how we value it. You know, historically, we had a very clear, narrow set of skills that we value, that were taught in universities, colleges, and our recruiting process is still very focused on GPAs and degrees. And that narrow mindset doesn't help us attract the diverse group of people that may not have had the same opportunities to pay for that education, or, you know, be really attending school full time without having to have a full-time job as well, and so forth. So we need to be a lot more flexible, both to create and retain the much more bigger workforce that we need. As you said, the demand is there. We need those jobs. If we want to bring more people, we need to be more flexible. And I think a good example for all of us to think about is retaining parents in the workforce. When we say, oh, I have flexible hours, you know, you can stop earlier and then work at night. I mean, coming from consulting, I saw that so frequently. The truth is, if you have two full-time working parents, you can't both be working 60 hours a week, even if it's flexible, even if it's in the evening. There's just too much work that goes into running a house. So for all of us as employers to think about, what does truly being more flexible in what we value, how we value mean, so that we can attract more people, retain more people, and have a workforce that really has the diversity of talents that we need, and not the narrow set of knowledge skills that used to be valued 30 years ago.
Great, thank you so much. And Caprice, I'm going to turn to you. You know, you know, also kind of drawing on a point that that Elena raised in terms of, you know, what we value, why we value, and this idea of just a narrow mindset. And you know, from what I see, you know, we have all of these job opportunities available, you know, 431,000 jobs being, you know, offered. You know, in terms of that narrow mindset, in terms of the, you know, what we are thinking about in terms of what an employee looks like, you know, what are we missing? You know, how can we broaden our perspective, broaden our thinking, so that, you know, we're able to be more successful in providing opportunities for the communities. And, you know, and certainly with Fountain of Youth, you know, you're thinking about, you know, essentially wraparound services for the community.
Yeah, absolutely. What we've come up with during the pandemic is a model of true collaboration, and it instills a need for companies, community, public and private sectors to come together on one common goal, which is to really boost up the workforce mindsets of everyone. So it's like, it's put skin in the game. Everybody got to have some skin in the game, and it has to be trust built through these relationships. And so what I've discovered is that, like, I heard you talking about social stigmas. One of the things that really takes place in the people that is growing up in generational poverty all their lives are personal inner stigmas. So a lot of people hold themselves back because they don't believe that they can do something. They don't face those fears. The fears of failure, the fears of loss of identity, the fears of abandonment. So those are all the things that they don't want to face. And so what they do is they settle for less. And so what we do is we bring not only the colleges together, we bring the workforce development from the state of Iowa together, and lived experience individuals to talk to inmates that's currently incarcerated, and talk to them about things about, like, do you know about the id? Do you know about your ego? You know about the super ego? Do you know about the pleasure principles that you be chasing? And do you know about the need for survival with just not settling for less? And so we talk about life skills. We help them with really believing in themselves that they have potential and to actually seek that potential. I believe that the employers, what we do with them is talk to them about humane education, because I come to find that a lot of individuals in this world has been desensitized to humanity. So that's something that's very important in order for us to have a real structured environment of growth and prosperity for everyone. Now, we also realize that individuals have deficiencies. And that means that somebody's going to have to be able to step up and stand up and help other people get up that can't make it up on their own. I talked to my dad yesterday and I asked him something. I said, man, Dad, we've been poor all our life, right? And he said, yeah, we've been poor all our life. I said, so now you taking lunches to individuals in your town. He live in Missouri. And he said, yeah, I'm taking lunches. And the kids, they be saying free lunch, free lunch. And I thought about when we lived in the projects in Chicago. And I never knew my dad had a choke sandwich. That's like a free sandwich. And he was like, yeah, I used to eat choke sandwiches. I say, but now look at you. Since you've changed your mindset, now you're being a part of the solutions and not a part of the problem. So I think all that's very necessary to unlock human capital.
So let me just ask you to follow on that. And thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that's a very, it's a powerful and important point in terms of thinking about being part of the solution. You use the term that, we're desensitized to humanity, that we have to, embrace and recognize, what we see in the folks around us, the people around us. And these are members of our communities. They're not other. These are our community members. Employers or corporations, companies are, in some aspects seen as a person. They have all these kinds of rights, but that humanity piece may not be there, right? And so if we were to think about, how do we get in, companies, how do we get businesses, how do we get employers who may be unsure of how to effectively work with our populations, that, they may need augmented services, may need supports in different ways that perhaps they aren't necessarily accustomed to if they're just, skimming off of, whoever comes to the door. Can you talk a little bit about, how can we get our employers, corporations to, embrace that humanity, to recognize the opportunities that are available with the communities that you serve?
Well, I can only go off the model that we're doing here in my town. We started something called Community and Change. That's a workshop that's facilitated by myself, which is a person that comes from lived experience from diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what I do is I bring the voices of individuals that also is from the community to be able to sit in front of the employers or the prospective organizations and agencies to be able to hear their stories about trauma, to be able to hear their stories about inadequacy, to be able to hear their stories about triumph over tragedy. And what that does is it bridges the gap for them to relate to them, because at some point they have to see themselves as a human as well. And for to tap into that humanity from themselves, it'll give them the need to want to help somebody else as opposed to just helping themselves with something that's temporary, which is capital, which is money. It's not going, you can't take it with you. So what it does is it starts to pierce at their heartstrings to be able to say, wow, I can really benefit from this person who I never thought that life really mattered. They was just a body. So when we do the model of approaching businesses out here, we tell them that to give individuals an opportunity, a first chance, second chance, or a third chance to prove themselves based off of you have a need and the community have a need. How do we come together and know that we all are in this together? Because right now, a lot of people a lot of companies out here, I don't know how it is on the East Coast, but they desperate for bodies. They desperate for workers. But the thing is, they need to have some rest and relaxation to not think that their company is gonna fold. So they need someone to come in and bridge that gap. So we started a model of job coaching and job training and job preparation with these agencies to give them the comfort to know that we got somebody that's gonna help us help ourselves.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. And I think that an important point, you're helping to see beyond. So it's not just a job, we're talking about, thinking about long-term solution. I'm going to turn to Marisa, just, on that point. You and Martin are working on teaching, computer skills, and certainly, those are helpful, but it also seems like you are teaching the women that you're working with not only how to learn, but really teaching them how to prepare for the future, because we don't know what the jobs of the future look like. And we can talk about all the ways that technology, shifting to automation. And so it seems like the work that you're doing, to Caprice's point, that it's not just teaching the skills, so important, but you're also thinking about, what does the future of work look like, and the skills that you're teaching for the future, the future of work. So, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a bit about, what does that look like for the women that you're working with? And if you were to think about the, other businesses, other groups and the kind of ancillary, opportunity services that could provide that kind of future proofing, what you're trying to provide for the women that you're working with. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I would just start by saying that for many people who are returning from prison or jail, oftentimes when they're trying to find employment or they're starting a new job, this is also coinciding with their efforts to find stable and affordable housing, to reintegrate into their communities, and for some to continue managing things like substance use disorder. So there's a lot going on all at once, and knowing some web design or some employable skills isn't going to get you all the way to a successful future. So I think there's kind of a lot more that needs to be done beyond just the scope of what we're hoping to do. So I mean, currently there are some pre-release programs that help people prepare for things like finding employment and housing after incarceration. And then post-release, there are some check-ins, for example, with like parole and probation officers, but a lot of times these aren't usually very personalized, and they're also kind of disjoint from new employers, and focus more on checking whether infractions have been made rather than supporting success. So while some of these issues are beyond the scope of what we're doing and what employers might be able to do, I do hope that eventually we get to something where there's a more streamlined and supportive pathway from incarceration to successful post-release life that could involve employers and educators. But I think this is a very big task to take on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Martin, do you want to add onto Marissa's points?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you, Michellana and Marisa both made good points about all the ancillary requirements, but yeah, those are huge. So at least for our part, what we're trying to do in the wiggle room that we have available to ourselves is that we're hoping to eventually collaborate with job placement programs and also specific employers who are willing to give our students a fair shot after release. But also many big firms today, particularly in the US, are taking increasingly progressive stances when it comes to hiring policies for formerly incarcerated people. So like, as an example, in our course last summer, we brought in current workers from a number of these big companies to talk about their own jobs and their experiences with web programming to the women in our class. And so, well, public sentiment and policy are the keys to laying the foundations for real improvement. I think we're seeing that private companies and nonprofits can also play a vital role in paving the way for that change too.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you. Elena, I'm going to turn it over to you to ask you to comment on this idea of, those, the ecosystem of support that ideal, what we'd like to see, and maybe the reality of what we actually see in terms of supporting these vulnerable members of our communities. And I'll just say that, after we have Elena, I do see that we have some questions coming in, so I'll invite you to continue sending those in. But before we turn it over to the Q&A, Elena, I'll just give you an opportunity to talk about what you're seeing.
Thank you. Yes, I think that it is really important that we all work together to create those ecosystems. The solution or the change is not going to come from just one organization. And also that we work with those groups and with that people to create those ecosystems, that we're not paternalizing and assuming that we know what everyone needs, but actually working with them and investing in them so they're able to have agency and build their own needs, but giving them resources to do it. So I think that's really important. And I also wanted to say, picking up on a question that you asked earlier, what can employers do, or what can we do to get employers more in that mindset? I really think that all of you listening today have a lot more power than you think in driving change. We've heard, the Great Resignation is real. And I think for the first time is shifting how many employers, politicians think. I think now employers have direct influence on management decisions just because of how transparent everything is, social media. So where you choose to bring your talent, where you choose to work, how you choose to raise your voice, if you see that your employer could be doing more in their community, could be partnering more with others, it really matters a lot. And we're already seeing a lot of change that, 10 years ago seemed like small moves, but now the power of employers, and especially employers like all of you that will be in middle management or above, you can really change things. So I just wanted to empower everyone to know that where they take their talent and how they use their voice, it's really mattering and changing things.
And Elena, maybe if I could just ask you to, and again, just reflecting on the fact that, your maybe small step is you started, bridging the gap, when you were a Sloan student, really looked to bring individuals together to start thinking about, how do we think about this question around, inclusion, so that we're inviting everyone to be a part of, humanity, as Caprice has raised. So if you were to think about, what those small steps could look like, or how do we embrace our own ability to be empowered to make these changes? What would you recommend in terms of where people start?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of everyday actions from, little things that we all know, just being an ally in a room when you see someone is being mansplained, or the voice of a person in your group is being disregarded because they're not asking in the conventional communication that other people are used to, being able to raise their voice, questioning the diversity of the leadership in your employers. And when you're answering even employee engagement surveys, mentioning that, I think many of you will be very, very soon in a position of hiring, if you aren't already, and demanding fair processes, equitable processes, asking the question, where are we sourcing for these employees? Are we just going to our standard 10 schools or choice, or are we being a lot more expansive? Are we looking for investing in people maybe coming from with a background of having been incarcerated? Are we being expansive? Asking those questions when you're in a position of hiring, of where are we sourcing the people? What is our process here? Do we really care about GPAs? Are we really focusing in the skills that really matter for this job? Can we train people in some of these things and be more flexible in those small decisions in who you are hiring and how you are including them in your teams are making a difference, because there's a lot of you now that think this way, and there's a critical mass, and it's making, you know, the whole cancel culture is also happening within management, I think, and you can drive that with these everyday decisions around who you hire and how you engage your teams.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. I will invite you to, again, add your questions in chat, and we'll get those forwarded along. I'm going to start with one of the questions that we have. And Caprice, I'll direct this to you to kick us off. How do we partner with or invite in allies safely to help engage with our vulnerable populations? Some of our allies may have their own learning needs and may inadvertently re-traumatize or harm the communities that they're meant to help. So do you have some suggestions on how to successfully and humanely partner with or invite allies and to safely work with the vulnerable populations? And you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So being open-minded with, engaging, the community and those who are willing to be a part of the solutions, those who want things to change. You have a mass population of individuals that don't see change as being possible. So you have to engage with those who actually are seeking change. And if they want to put in the footwork to make it happen, I think cultural integration has to be the forefront of that conversation, to really identify with, like, defining what that word means to someone. Because if a person hear the word integration, the first thing they may get afraid because of indoctrinations that's been passed on through generations. But cultural integration doesn't mean that an individual is giving up their identity of their culture. What it's doing is giving them an opportunity to embrace the diversity of all cultures without sacrificing their own. So I believe that has to be the forefront of that engagement, to really go with the mindset of cultural integration.
Right, thank you. Anyone else want to add onto Caprice's comment? Okay. All right. So we will leave it at that.
Please.
Go ahead.
I think it's a really important point what Caprice is saying and around the cultural integration, and maybe people don't know and understand what that means, but it's a very fine balance between including the voices and putting all the weight on the people who have a different background to change everything and fix everything. So we really have to be careful on where we get educated, and we're not always going to the same person and asking the same person who may be an immigrant in our team, or a Hispanic person, or a member of LGBT community. Like, if you have very few of those peoples in your company, don't always go to that one person to be the voice and the representation, and try to reach elsewhere to educate yourselves, because it can be very exhausting and sometimes traumatizing. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. And I think that they're all, and I think that, Elena, maybe to your point earlier, is that it's idea of, kind of starting with yourself and thinking about, like, what are those small things that you can do to embrace the power that you do have, or recognizing the privilege that you do have, and how do you use that in the service of serving all the members in our community. So I'm going to, ask a question, and maybe Marisa, I'll throw it open to, ask you to kick us off. So we've talked about employers. We've actually not talked a lot about other stakeholders, so political will, and what is it that we would want to see from, other stakeholders, including maybe our politicians, government officials. If there was an ask that you could, that maybe comes to you about, what is the thing that we could be asking, that we'd want to see more of from our political leaders in terms of serving our marginalized populations, what comes to mind for you? What are you seeing in the work that you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So I think one thing, and we're sort of already moving in the right direction on this, is relating to one of the challenges Martin mentioned earlier for formerly incarcerated people getting employment, is a lot of employers will ask whether or not you've been incarcerated, and if so, they might immediately write you off. So one thing that's happening is some states are banning the box, which means they make it illegal for private employers to ask about conviction history. This has already been done in 15 states, including Massachusetts, but that's something we could continue to push for in other states. And another thing would be continuing to advance legislation to improve prison conditions and expand the rights of incarcerated people. For example, recently Pell Grants, which are grants for low-income students for higher education. Back in 1994, these were made unavailable to incarcerated people, but they've recently been reinstated. So that's one good thing, but I think there still needs to be a lot of work in terms of rolling that out and making it accessible in practice. So those would be some of the things off the top of my head.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Martin, do you want to add?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I think besides, and this is something I think we touched on again already, but I think when we do feel that political will is not there, and we feel public policy or public sentiment is, lagging behind our own values, it's incumbent on, ourselves or, employers to affect the change that, they wanted to see. So this is true in everything, right? So like policy almost always follows practice. Coming from, we're situated here at MIT, and I think a great, example that's relevant to us is autonomous driving. So, there were no laws for autonomous driving until companies started to push the cars onto the roads. And so I think it's, employees can choose to make an effort to open their doors to previously incarcerated people, even if before the government mandated.
Great, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, I'm mindful of time, and I know that our hackathon folks want to have a few words to say as we move on. And so what I would like to ask, maybe a final question for all of our panelists, and Elena, I'm going to start with you again. So two questions. One is, when you think about population that you serve, and kind of where we are right now, we're transitioning out of COVID, but we're also moving into, kind of the brave new world, uncertain future. What keeps you up at night? What are the issues, the concerns that you have that keep you up, and what do you feel inspired by? And we'll have these as the kind of final reflections that we'll leave with the folks that are listening, a part of our audience today.
I think we've really covered most of the concerns. What really keeps me up at night is the short-term thinking and the challenge of moving all of our mindsets. And, truly, when we are such a melting pot now, changing how we think about each other to truly connect with each other and be partners to each other. I think it's a long, long journey to change those mindsets. It's difficult. But what excites me and what gives me hope is that I'm seeing change happen at a speed much faster than ever before, and truly believe that what, when I was in college felt like a dream that would never come true. It's really happening now, and seeing the power of the new generations, how they're influencing political decisions and management decisions in a way that was not remotely possible, 2 decades ago. So I think we can do it, and we are doing it. And I think all of you have a lot more power that maybe you realize in driving this change.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Martin, I will turn to you.
Yeah, I think one thought I've had recently is that I think people often see education in prisons as particularly political or maybe even controversial. But I hope we can convince people that it shouldn't be. So yes, it's a tremendous benefit to the students receiving the education, but these opportunities, given to the students have real effects in the outside world by reducing recidivism, helping people secure jobs post-release, and these benefit, the people at large too, who are not themselves in prison. And it really is something that's good for everyone.
Excellent. Thank you. And Marisa, so what keeps you up at night, concerns, and what do you feel hopeful in this moment?
Yeah. I think a lot of the things that keep me up at night have already been touched on a little bit, but I think just to sum it up, it's just the feeling that not everyone gets a fair shot. So that keeps me up at night. But one thing that makes me hopeful is talking to our students. I've been very fortunate to get to know a lot of our students on a personal level, and I'm just inspired by them and their positive outlooks and hope that they have, and the amazing things that they're doing and hope to do.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. And Caprice, I'm going to give you our final panelist comment.
Well, what keeps me up at night, literally, because every day I'm with the individuals that we're talking about today, a lot of them, and every night I actually wake up in the middle of the night wondering, like, how am I going to approach the next day with being an effective force in somebody's life, with giving them a powerful message to inspire them. Because what keeps me up at night is not just my children's children, but everybody's children's children. The future is going to be like Martin had alluded to. He said that, it's going to get worse. Well, one of them said it's going to get worse, which it is. It's always going to get worse, and then it's going to get better, because we're going to face those challenges. And Elena had said something that I'm actually pushing forward as a part of my message with individuals every day now. Relationships and resources. Resources with people as being resources. And building those relationships is most important, because we always heard the old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And so individuals that's been marginalized has to become somebody, as opposed to settling for being considered nobody. And that's what keeps me up at night.
And you're hopeful?
Absolutely. I believe it happens. The mindset, so Elena, what I discovered is the mindset change is one person at a time. Because one person could pour into a lot of more one persons. And that's the ripple effect. Poverty has been here forever. But one person at a time, we can help somebody climb out. And that matters.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you so much. And I will say that, I am, as I'm sure our audience, inspired by you, inspired by the work that you do. And, I will say that, Caprice, I think that you summed it up when we started by saying, working on change by walking in change. And I think that, that really encapsulates the work that each of you are doing, serving the members of our community through, addressing the multitude of issues that serve as a barrier for our community, but certainly, you all are looking to just, knock those barriers down, lowering them so that we can all benefit from, what our society has to offer. So I truly appreciate your thoughtful reflections. I appreciate the great work that you're doing and the communities that you serve. And thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation and discussion with you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Ali. Thank you.